Welcome to our session, and now I will turn you over to Megan.
This is Megan. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to share my screen so we can dive into our PowerPoint. Welcome to Community Transitions 101, Building Blocks for New Programs. Our first slide says presented by the Dale McIntosh Center. We have a couple of introductions of our speakers with photos to go with them. My name is Megan. I am a white woman with a physical disability and a pink buzz cut, and my pronouns are she and her. I am the manager of collaborative programs at the Dale McIntosh Center, and I'm here with my colleagues Marquita Faison and Rich Skurbitz, who are going to introduce themselves as well. Marquita, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marquita Faison. My pronouns are she and her. I am a Black female with braids and glasses. I'm currently wearing black today. I am the Transitions Liaison Supervisor for our Transitions team here at Dale McIntosh.
This is Megan. Thank you, Kita. And Rich?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rich Skurbitz, and my pronouns are he, him, and I also have a short buzz cut with a full beard and wearing black today, and I'm excited that you're here. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Rich. This is Megan. I'm going to go ahead and dive in. I'm excited to be here with Kita and Rich, who've been a really key part in rebuilding our transition program over the past year with new staff and new funding. And basically, we're here to share about our tools and experiences that we've accumulated over this past year, and a lot of stuff that we've learned the hard way, so that folks who are in the same shoes we were this time last year can learn from those tools and experiences. And we're excited to be here empowering folks to do this important work. This next slide says our philosophy. I think this is a good place for us to start. Our philosophy, which is our foundation for all of the transitions that we support, is that all people with disabilities can live independently in the community with the right supports. I know that probably seems obvious, but I can't tell you how many people come to us and say, well, how do we know if someone can transition? Or how do we know if someone's ready to transition? And our job is not to make that determination. Our job is to assume that people do have the innate capability to live independently, and that the only variable is those resources. So we're shifting the conversation from ability or inability to accessing the necessary resources to support those transitions. The next two slides are going to show a timeline for our transition services. I'm going to describe each section of the timeline, but you can also view all of our slides as a PDF document on the April conference website, if that is helpful to you. So the transition timeline is, the purpose is to give you a sense of what transitions look like from start to finish. Transitions take a long time. There's a lot of moving pieces and they're very complex. So we're going to zoom out a little bit before we get into the nitty-gritties of resources and challenges, best practices, and so on that my colleagues will be discussing. So first things first, we start with an intake. This is our process for turning a person into a consumer and adding them to our database. This is when we do some initial screening. Kita will talk later about identifying some red flags and challenges super early on so that we can be proactive about addressing those, getting those taken care of. It's also really important to build rapport from the first contact with the consumer that you have. You know, one thing that successful transition relies on is truthfulness and trust. And we need to have a strong relationship with the consumer for them to trust us and be truthful and share information with us so that we can help make transition successful. The intake is pretty short. It only tends to take about 1 or 2 meetings. What does take a little longer is the actual transition plan. So once a person has decided that they want to move out and live independently, we work with them to create a transition plan. And for us, that looks like a process of what we call person-centered counseling, because each transition is different, because each person is different. So what someone wants to achieve living in the community is entirely up to them, and they get to help us understand what their goals and priorities are when it comes to leaving the facility. Do they want to go home and live with a family? Do they want to find their own apartment? Do they want to move in with a friend or a roommate? This is our time to determine those goals so that we are working towards them. And also, what long-term services and supports are needed to make those goals successful. This is also when we connect with the person's support network. If they have friends or family members that are supportive of their goal to move back into the community, that's extremely helpful. Also, the social worker at the facility, if the social worker is on our side and in our pocket, they can do a lot of really helpful things. And this process typically takes about 1 month. This next part of the process is what takes the longest, and that's preparing the long-term services and support. So we need to have LTSS in place before the person leaves the facility to make sure that their home environment is equipped for them to live successfully in it. So LTSS, again, is different for every person and every set of needs. LTSS could be housing, could be in-home care, income, assistive technology, durable medical equipment, and home modifications, mental health supports if those are needed. Mental health supports are very often a piece that's crucial, but that people tend to leave out. And a lot of times mental health is the reason why people end up in facilities in the first place, specifically any type of issue with addiction or substance use. So addressing those early on can be really helpful. We also go home shopping, and we'll talk about where we get the funding that we use to purchase some home goods. But when the person goes into their apartment, it needs to not be empty. It needs to have what they need to live in an apartment. It needs a bed, it needs dishes, it needs towels, making sure they have those home essentials. And this process can take anywhere from 2 to 6 months, depending on what the needs are. Next is discharge planning. This process usually happens about 2 weeks before the discharge actually occurs. And this is mostly just follow up, follow up, follow up. As helpful as the social worker might be, we can't make the assumption that everything is in place. We have to check in with them, make sure, have they been connected with a community doctor that they can start seeing when they leave the facility? Do they have a 30-day supply of their prescriptions that they're ready to go home with? Do they have that hospital bed that the social worker was supposed to work on getting a hold of for them? So just revisiting that transition plan and making sure that everything we identified that needs to be in place is in fact in place. Also, maybe addressing some anxiety and walking through the consumer what that move-in day is going to look like. And then it's move-in day. This is a whole day, that's 8 hours. We try to schedule the discharge as early in the day as possible so that we have the whole day to work with the consumer to get them set up and situated in their new home. Once they leave the facility, we will typically go grocery shopping. Because of COVID, we're having to do a lot of this remotely, so we'll usually do an Instacart delivery. So getting their fridge stocked with food, setting up all of their home items. working with the consumer to figure out how they want to set up their home. Where do you want your towels? Where do you want to keep your sheets? Where would you like to position your couch, and getting those items set up and in place. And also meeting the community. Do they have neighbors they want to connect with? Do they want to connect with their friends and family that maybe they haven't seen since they went into the facility? And we'll talk about that piece of it more in our follow-up period. Follow-up is our process of making sure that the transition is not only successful on move-in day, but continues to be successful for the year after the move-in happens. So we'll do our check-ins weekly at first, but then we move to doing monthly check-ins as the consumer gets established. The consumer may encounter needs that they didn't identify while they were still living in the facility. So things like independent living skills training. Do they know how to budget? Do they know how to use paratransit? Can they manage their time so that they're able to make it to all of their doctor's appointments, things like that. And community involvement is really important at this stage as well. When someone's living in a facility, they're in a community whether they want to be or not. And when they leave that facility, they lose access to that ready-made community that they were used to having access to previously. So they have to build a new network, support network, a new community. Things like peer groups, social activities can be helpful. Also employment and volunteering. Now that you have all of this free time to use in the community, how would you like to spend that? And again, that process takes up to 1 year. One thing that we're doing throughout this process is outreach. So in non-COVID times, we would be going out to the facilities and doing presentations, but we have to get creative since everything's happening remotely right now. We get a lot of consumers coming in through word of mouth. Our consumers tell other people in their facilities about, hey, DMC is helping me get the heck out of here. They can help you too. Having a good relationship with the social worker is really important so that the social worker knows, hey, we're here to help. DMC is an ally. And if you are working with someone at the facility that really doesn't need to be there, help them connect with us. So making sure that we're doing outreach consistently so that we have a steady stream of referrals coming in. So that is a bird's eye view of our transition process to give you an idea of what that looks like from start to finish. And at this point, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the resources that we use most frequently to make sure that our transitions are successful. And for that, I'm going to pass over to Rich to share about those resources.
Thank you, Megan. So for this session, first of all, again, my name is Rich. I did not tell you what I do here, but my title here is the Community Transition Coordinator, or a Community Transition Coordinator. And so for my session, I'm going to, as Megan shared, just dive in a little bit more about the resources that we utilize. And I have to say that I work with an awesome team, and we're a tight-knit group, and we utilize each other as well as external community resources. And of course, the chief resource is the consumer. And so my first slide talks about it. It's a breakdown by a flow chart, basically, with the title of Transition Resources. And I break the first one down into income, housing, in-home care, and other LTSS. And so let's just, and some of these may be familiar to you, some may not, depending on how long you've been in the IL world. And the other thing that I wanted to share with all of you is that, of course, California may have some different resources than what you all might have across the country. And so All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the income slide. So the first resource I list on my intro slide is income, which is the second slide of my presentation. And income could include the benefits, SSI, SSDI, employment, and retirement. So I'm going to just share a couple things about each one of those. These are essential, what I would call essential in resources or ingredients of transition. And the first and one of the first ones that that we work with is housing, because in order for someone to transition out of a care facility, of course, they need somewhere to go to. And so so we work with our county housing authority with and consumers on applying for NED vouchers, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So, and of course, in order to have housing, you need an income of some sort. And so the first one that I have listed is SSI, SSDI. I opened this presentation by saying that we have an awesome team, and we work closely with our tight-knit group. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out here was that we do have an awesome benefit specialist, Olivia, who has created some educational workshops to help consumers learn about benefits, including how to apply and the rights and things like that. So so that's one of the, and then she works with SSA, Social Security Administration, and other benefit resources as well. And then for employment, of course, many employment, Department of Rehabilitation, it's for some of you, it's Department of Vocational Rehabilitation or whatever it might be in your state. But that's one area. And I know that there's others like the workforce development centers across the states that that we can work with as well, and consumers can work with. So retirement, that may seem to be like kind of like an abstract thought, but I put that up there because we did have a situation or a couple situations where consumers did have some other income benefits that perhaps they didn't know about until we got involved and started asking them questions. And so where they found, you know, well, yeah, I have a retirement account, and haven't dove into that. So let's see if I've missed anything. All right, so that leads us into the in-home care slide. And again, this is where I just want to share that the resources that I'm going to be talking about in the next few slides I'm going to try to be as general as I can. And I know that across the country, I know that different resources are listed as or named as different services. So, but in-home services, IHSS here will pay for services provided to you so you can remain safely in your home, in your own home. And there's some eligibility criteria, and the types of services that can be applied for through the IHSS include things like house cleaning, meal preparation, laundry, you know, some of those personal care service, some of those services that well, are activities of daily living and are needed in your own home. Again, in California, we have our own eligibility criteria, and you would need to search your area for what's available in your area and how to apply and the eligibility criteria there. So, so the Hcba waiver, again, this is one of this is a resource that in other areas may be titled something else. But here in California, it's the home and community-based I always forget what the A is, and but we'll get into that in a second. So I'll call on my colleagues. But it's basically the state Medicaid programs, and it's designed to allow individuals to remain living in their home or return to living in their homes after an extended stay in nursing facilities. And here in California, it's formerly referred to as the California Community Transitions Project. One of the other things that I wanted to share with you is that even though it might be California based, or that's what it's known to us, I share that with you in case you're like me and you look for keywords to go and find new resources in your area. So that's why I'm kind of going a little bit beyond sometimes with just highlighting. So, it sometimes can provide more hours of in-home services than IHSS, such as possibly 24-hour in-home care. And then there's the Medicare Advantage plans, and there's a lot of them out there. If you know anything about the insurance world, you know that there's a lot of different plans out there, and Medicare Advantage plans are not excluded from that. So again, this is something that you would need to do some research in your area on, what those might include, what's the coverage for the different plans in different areas, and research those resources for your consumers. And then of course we have the private pay providers. And then the next slide that I have is other LTSS, long-term support services. Megan talked a little bit about the mental health and how important that is. And we really emphasize that from the very beginning throughout the whole transition process. It's such a key for, throughout the whole process, and as well as good mental health care is also important for not preventing the return into the institution. So we do talk about, counselor options, therapist options, telehealth options for mental health, and psychiatrists, and the importance of meds in some of the instances of treatment. So, and then some of these other ones are, again, a little bit more, if you've been around the IL world, you'll obviously know these, but accessibility. I have to say that in this program, in our program, it's one of, like Megan shared earlier, we follow people, and I think you're going to know this from, you're going to hear this from our next presenter, Marquita, as well. But it is a very in-depth, very hands-on process with our consumers that we actually walk through. It's not like a referral, that we're referring them to a different agency. We're actually there throughout the entire process with the consumer. And then we have an obligation for a year after their transition to follow up with them. So accessibility, we look at with the consumer, what are some of the, maybe there's housing modifications that are needed, perhaps a ramp, perhaps bathroom modifications or grab bars. Things like that. We have a database of contractors and construction contractors and volunteers who we can call on, and who submit bids and can go out and do the work. Another accessibility feature that we look at is the need for durable medical equipment. Example is, a transfer bench. And sometimes that can be the world of difference, as you all know, the world of difference from access to inaccess of some of the bathroom features, such as the showers or bathtubs. So Megan also talked about the social networks and how important that is. And we do, again, we assess that with the consumer and work through that with them as well as they take those different steps into the transition. So community involvement, we look at support networks such as friends, family, who's going to be there for you when you get out, when you need some assistance, who's going to be your network, what are your interests. You know, we all need to enjoy life. So how are you going to enjoy life when you get out? And we look at the different peer and social groups and that are available. So let's go to the last slide. Again, other long-term support services. Ombudsman program. I don't know how many of you have ever used it in your state, in your area. It's like the Adult Protective Services for skilled nursing facility residents. I can tell you from experience that here in Orange County, they have been, for me and for our consumers, very responsive. What are the different transportation services, whether that's providing bus training for consumers, whether that's getting them the resources for accessible accessible taxi companies, and whether that's providing us services to apply for the paratransit. And so transportation is another key. Some other ones are meals. Some of you may have Meals on Wheels, so you're familiar with that, where meal is prepared and delivered to consumers' homes. That's always we have and utilize those types of services. SNAP, I listed SNAP there, and basically in California, SNAP is the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And many of us know this as food stamps. In California, CalFresh. And then some of the other perhaps not thought about are the subsidies for utilities, phone, and internet. And some of these could be like the Federal Emergency Broadcast or Broadband Program that's offered from like the FCC, or perhaps your local communities might have subsidies for phone and internet. Or what about the phones? I know many people call them the Obama phones, but the free phones that are available to consumers. These are all awesome resources that and this is a very limited list of the resources that we delve into during our transition program. So, and that ends my presentation. Again, I just want to share with you and say thank you for being here and thank you for the opportunity. And next is Marquita.
Hey,
before
Nick,
Richard,
I want to disrupt the flow real quick. Sorry, guys. Rich, I think we skipped over housing. Could we talk a little bit more about that?
Oh,
also,
sure.
Sorry, Richard, this is Kim, and there was a question about your stuff. Do you want me to hold the questions till later or now?
Let's do it later. I'm gonna
Okay.
address Megan. Thank you for bringing me back to the housing. And so housing in our area, I did say that we work closely with the Orange County Housing Authority, and we work with them with distributing, applying for, administering the NED vouchers. NED vouchers are again a federal, but administered through counties, and NED is non-elderly disabled vouchers. And then project-based vouchers. And basically a project-based voucher are vouchers that could be used in different areas, perhaps in different cities, or maybe it's like sometimes we'll find Anaheim, a project-based voucher called the Anaheim project-based voucher, or the Anaheim vouchers. And what else was I going to say here? But and then, or they're perhaps for specific apartment complexes, new complexes, or just other complexes in the area. So that's what project-based vouchers are. And for me, when I research these, I look under the city housing authorities. I look under county housing authorities to see if there's any project-based vouchers if consumers don't qualify for NED vouchers. So also the senior housing, I missed a whole slide. I thought it was just one, but the senior housing is we look at the senior housing lists, not only because some of our consumers are older adults who qualify for senior housing, but also sometimes the senior housing complexes will be open to having applicants who are not elderly and disabled, not elderly but disabled applicants, and due to the need for the accessibility aspect. We also work with consumers in looking at Facebook or Craigslist listings and other private listings. We have a bulletin board resource that we direct consumers out to. And then family and friends. And by this, sometimes there's family or friends that may have a house where they can turn perhaps a garage into an apartment, or perhaps they have an extra room that they could create as an apartment and for somebody with for a consumer. So those are all housing resources that we look to. Did I miss anything, Megan? Thank you for bringing me back to that. And home and community based. All right, so Megan and Marquita, I again forgot about what the A stands for.
Hi, this is Megan. It's home and community based assistance.
Thank you.
Okay, we're in alphabet soup over here. You can't remember all the acronyms.
And with that, I think that we're going to let Marquita introduce Marquita. There she is.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to address some common challenges. Oh my God, there's a lawnmower outside my window right now. Sorry about that. So we're going to address some common challenges that we have encountered over the year of starting our program. And so the first one is family members' disagreements and supports. Now, family members can agree and they can disagree with the decision of the consumer. It doesn't matter if they are supportive or not. We work with the consumer and on their self-determination and their own advocacy for leaving the facility. We prefer, obviously, to work with the supportive families because they can become caregivers and can provide overall support to the consumers during this transition process and even after. Some family members who may have power of attorney over the consumer, they may assume that they have control over their right to transition. That is not true. The consumer is still in control of their own self-determination and their transition process. Next one, please. Do I have answer? Oh, empowering decision-making and self-advocacy. As the CTC, we like to empower the consumer to have a voice in their own decision-making. We like to enable them to self-advocate for what they need and what they want. This includes them making the choices in their own decisions, including home buying, such as choosing their own colors that they want for their home, the styles, things of that nature. You have to remember this is the first time that they will be able to make their own decisions since leaving the facility. Some of them have been in there for years and they want to leave it to you to make the decisions for them. And I always encourage them, no, this is your first time doing this. This is your, you choose what color you want for your bathroom, choose the kind of sofa you want, choose the kind of dishes you want. And that empowers them. And they're like, wow, I haven't had to do this in years. And so it's very much fun, this part of the process, as they get to make all these powerful decisions, whereas in the facility, they're told when to get up, they're told when to go to bed, when to eat, and things of that nature. So this is like their first time when they can be like, I can do this for myself and I can make my own decisions. Next slide. Addressing some consumer anxiety and frustrations, which is a big one for us for the most part. We allow the consumer a safe space to feel these emotions and to help them process them. For some, resuming the responsibilities of day-to-day actions will overwhelm them and they will need to talk about it. Sometimes they'll just call and be like, I'm so frustrated, or I'm so anxious about having to move out. And then we go through the steps of what's causing them the anxiety. Do we need to slow it down maybe? Do we need to just take a pause and let them, catch up to their emotions? Sometimes we just got to have patience with them and guide them through the process. And this in itself is a relief to the consumer. And slowing down the process of the transition, we may have our timeline, we got to have this done in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but sometimes we need to stop and consider what the consumer is feeling. And then you slow it down according to their needs. They may have many questions that they'll ask you. You have to allow them to be in control of their transition, and it will help to decrease their anxiety. Suggestions of having them talk with a mental health professional is always granted if the process is too overwhelming for them. This helps them process their thoughts and emotions, but more often they will use us as their sounding board. They will use us as their way to talk out their issues, and that's perfectly okay. The next challenge that we face is the post-transition isolation and community involvement. We help them to assist with reconnecting with family members and friends that they used to have, or they haven't had a chance to speak to outside of the facility, especially during COVID. A lot of families were separated and didn't have a chance to meet or come in and speak with each other. Oh my God, when did our camera turn off? Also, to get them involved with meeting new people outside of the facility, such as going to senior centers or wellness centers, getting them involved in extracurricular activities, finding out things that they enjoy doing, and assisting with locating individuals of like minds and interest. A lot of times we can get them involved in doing things such as, for some of our women, they like to go back doing crafts and like doing blankets and things of that nature. And so I find things in the community that they can go do that with. And this also helps them to bridge the gap between the facility life versus their independence with support. Next slide. And so during the course of this year, we have identified many challenges that to try to avoid for future use. And the first is a lack of income, credit issues, and personal debt. Now, we can assist the consumer with applying for the SSI or SSDI. Some in the facilities cannot work anymore. However, some can continue to work. The Department of Rehabilitation is a key resource in this area. Every person can live independently with the right supports, and everyone can work with the right supports too. Helping discuss credit issues as it pertains to housing, and working on ways to do credit repair. Helping address personal debt issues and how to pay down debt using ways that will be less of a financial burden on the consumer. Some of our consumers have past evictions. So with some consumers that will have them on their records, it is difficult to acquire an apartment with one. However, as the CTC, you may be able to assist by reaching out to the landlord to see if paying a higher deposit might be added to increase their chances of renting. This may be a second chance for someone who has no choice but to receive an eviction due to various circumstances, such as loss of job, becoming disabled, or hospitalizations. Another one is past drug offenses or having a criminal background. Remember to check with your consumer and ask if there are prior drug offenses or any other criminal background, because if they are applying for housing, this could be an obstacle for them. The Housing Authority do very thorough background checks on the applicants. The Housing Authority will ask for a written statement from the consumer about their background, and they will make the decision regarding status at that time. Another one is immigration status. CTCs and the Housing Authority does have to check if your immigration status is a US citizen. There is no way around this based on the housing rules. Any unmet mental health and addiction needs. If the consumer discloses that they are currently under the care of a psychiatrist or therapist, it is vital to maintain that relationship and to see that they have their medication during this stressful time, and that they are connected at the transition to their mental health provider to maintain a smooth and safe transition. This is the same for any addictions that the consumer may have. They must show that they have a history of being clean and can maintain that. That information is given via talks with the medical staff, counselors, and/or therapists from their background. Another challenge that we come across is caregiver mistreatment. As we all know, finding a caregiver for your loved one is a very daunting task. And once they get one, it is very important that they don't mistreat their caregiver. So teaching independent living skills to the consumer who may not know that as an employer, he or she needs to treat the caregiver with dignity and respect. We need to ensure that we pair an appropriate caregiver to the consumer. We need to have a plan of action in place when behavior arises from the consumer towards the caregiver. And we need the consumer to be in communication with the caregiver to ensure that all supports and all services are being done, since they are in the home often together. And we have lastly identified as of late that early discharging from the facility is a big no-no. To receive the housing or the net voucher, the consumer cannot discharge early from the facility. They must remain in the facility until they have received their housing, and then may discharge once they have found an apartment to move to. Not having the appropriate services and supports in place can be a safety hazard for the consumer. That is why we don't want them to discharge early. Early discharges can lead to reinstitutionalization of the consumer. If housing, home modifications, IHSS, PT, OT, which is physical therapy, occupational therapy, nurse practitioners, and family, friends, and support is not put into place before transitions. Thank you.
This is Megan. Thanks, Kita. I'm going to talk about the most exciting piece of this, which is funding. I'm sure that one thought on a lot of folks' mind is, well, all of this sounds great, but how do we pay for it? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the patchwork funding sources that we use to make transitions happen. And we've had to kind of knit a number of these resources together over the past year. Because as all of us in the nonprofit world know, funding sources fluctuate and they come and go, and you have to be responsive to whatever is available to you at the time. So we have a couple of these. One is CARES Act funding. This is funding that we used for the first part of this past year when we were getting started. CARES Act funding was temporary funding from a COVID relief bill that passed last summer, and that was essentially funding that we could use however we felt was necessary, which was great. No strings attached funding is the best kind of funding. The downside of CARES Act funds, though, is that they were temporary, and we actually just ran out of those CARES Act funds, I think, last month. And so we've had to work to get other funding sources in place to make sure that our transitions in progress are not disrupted. However, if any of your centers do still have CARES Act funds available, please do consider using those for transitions. Money follows the person. So this is probably the key federal funding source for transitions. And this is actually this one's complicated, but Money Follows the Person is an initiative through Medicaid to provide home and community-based services as an alternative to institutional placement. We realized at the time of the Olmstead Supreme Court decision that it's actually more affordable, more cost-effective to pay for community living than to pay for institutional living, and Money Follows the Person came out of that. But this is an initiative that has been very hard to implement. One of the downsides is that it's very complex. It requires assessment by a nurse that we have to contract out for, and it requires Medicaid to essentially approve our full transition plan. And it's also for Medicaid recipients only. So if you have someone, for example, that has Medicare but not Medicaid, they would not be eligible for Money Follows the Person dollars. One of the resources that I provided in one of my later slides is a grantee list for Money Follows the Person. That is a list of every Money Follows the Person contact in every state. It's literally a list of emails. Just you can find the one for your state and just shoot that person an email, say that you're interested in getting contracted with Money Follows the Person. At least in California, our state level Medicaid administrators are looking to make this funding source more viable and easy to use. And if we want this to be a funding source that is sustainable and continues on in the future, ILCs need to jump on board. We need to be a part of making this funding work and letting Medicaid know what we need to be able to successfully administer these dollars. Next is the Department of Rehabilitation Transition Diversion Fund. This is a funding source that we tapped into recently, and it can be used for both transitions and diversions. Diversions being someone who lives in the community but is at risk of going into an institution and losing their independence. So it's a fairly flexible funding source. It does pay for all transition-related expenses up to $4,500 per consumer. That is a one-time approved cost. If somebody needs additional services, they will not be able to use this fund if they've already had a request approved by DOR. Some things to know about this funding source is that this is it is offered on a reimbursement basis after 60 days, and your center does need to be able to float that cost. We have a line of credit that we use for this purpose. We also have a general funding pool that we put our fundraising dollars into. That's more of that no strings attached money that we like so much. So we need to be able to make those payments up front in order to get reimbursed by DOR 60 days after the fact. One other unique thing about this funding source, at least for us, is that it is first come, first serve. So it's not just us, Dale McIntosh, using this funding source. It's centers all over the state, and DOR could blast out an email at any point saying, hey, our funding has dried up. We are no longer able to approve requests for this funding source. And then we have to change gears and rely on other funding sources to meet those needs. The last big one I want to talk about is called Dignity at Home. This is a local grant that we are receiving in partnership with our Area Agency on Aging, or our AAA. If you're not familiar with AAAs, they're kind of like ILCs, but their focus is on older adults. They're all across the nation, all across each state. And even though this is a local grant, I wanted to talk about it because having a partnership with our AAA in California, we call this the Aging and Disability Resource Connection. That's kind of the formal name of that partnership, but having a partnership with our AAA has been so valuable to us. And, you know, it's to the point where our AAA feels confident coming to us and saying, hey, you guys do home modifications all day, every day. How would you like to administer this grant for us that focuses on home modifications? So if you've not yet connected with your local AAA, highly recommend you do that. Those partnerships can be very fruitful. And I mentioned earlier, fundraising, fee-for-service programs and lines of credit can be useful, just because with a lot of these funding sources, the ILC does end up having to float some costs. So wanted to just kind of emphasize that. So this is our last slide. This is our takeaway slide. It includes an image of a DMC transition consumer who uses a wheelchair, posing in front of his new apartment, and he is smiling and holding his front door key. So just want to bring us home by saying that transitions, my staff hears me say this all the time, transitions are one of the most challenging but rewarding core services that independent living centers offer. What you are doing is helping someone to take back the freedom that belongs to them. And I can't think of anything more valuable that we can offer to a person with a disability. I know it's hard work. Kita and Rich, bless you for doing what you do. I know it's not easy, but we've seen these services be life-changing, and we hope that we can act as resources to all of you doing this important work. I did have a list of our resources. These are available on the April website. Job descriptions, memorandums of understanding, care plan templates. Please also use us as resources. Our information is in a previous slide. You can shoot any of us an email and we will answer questions and do what we can do to empower you in doing this work. And I believe that's it for us. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And we have a little bit of time for questions. Kim, I believe you were going to help us kind of moderate those.
Right. So the first one that we have comes from Joan, and it says, in our state, one of the barriers is lack of personal care attendance for in-home due to the pandemic. Do you have that barrier in your state?
Kita, do we have that barrier in our state?
I don't have an answer for all day, every day. Yes, we have. That's one of our main concerns is when they transition out. We try to provide them with the IHSS assistance, and right now providing caregivers is a dilemma because there isn't enough caregivers to go around for all the individuals that need the personalized home care. So hopefully with our government increasing the pay rate of these care providers, we will start to get more personal care attendants to help us out with our consumers and stuff. So yes, that is a big deal in California as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one, oops, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to add, this is Megan on the program administration side of things. One of the staff positions that we have at our agency is a recruitment specialist. So this is someone who does a couple of different things in this area. They do outreach to local community colleges, other schools. They post caregiver job descriptions online using things like care.com. We actually just developed a partnership with our local public authority. That's part of the IHSS program that oversees the caregiver registry. And so we have someone that they actually work out of the public authority office. So they're doing hands-on work with the public authority to streamline the way that they do things, make it as easy as possible for caregivers to get enrolled. We're also wanting to throw some funding their way to the public authority to do an overhaul of their website and their internal database. We're very lucky that we have some funding to be able to commit to systems change initiatives like that. So they need the funding, and we have it to give to help streamline that process a bit. So, you know, we're throwing all the resources we can at in-home care right now because that and housing are the two primary issues that we struggle with.
Okay, this was a comment coming from anonymous, more of a comment. Sometimes I have trouble knowing how much I can do for a client. I want to help with everything and do things quickly, but also allow my clients to learn how to do things for themselves and not feel rushed. Even before COVID-19, I have feared for the safety of people living in facilities. Then comes from Grace T. What if the disagreeable family member has guardianship over the person with a disability?
They're lovely to work with, aren't they? They may have guardianship, but that individual consumer still has rights. They sometimes the guardianship, it's a difference between guardianship and conservatorship. And so if it's a conservatorship, they have to work with someone else in order to facilitate their exit from the facility. Guardianship has different rights, and you have to check within your state as to what those rights are, because I don't know. In California, we can work with someone under a guardianship, not a conservatorship, because we have to go through their conservator in order to kind of like, can they please get out of the home? And if they feel that they're not ready, then we have to go by what they say, which is totally unfair sometimes. But a guardianship is a little different. So you have to check within your state what the rules are and how it pertains to the individual that's in the nursing facility. They do have some rights though. They do have some rights for their own say-so. So.
Could you speak to that first question as well about, balancing going too quickly and going at the consumer's pace?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, you go with the consumer at all times, because they are the expert on their life. Okay. So you go by what they tell you. Now, sometimes you do have to be like, okay, rush the paperwork or do this. But when it comes to them, their overall anxiety of it, you do have to stop and pause and take a breath, because it does become overwhelming for them. You have to think about it. They've been in this facility for 6 months to 3 or 4 years, and they've been having everything dictated to them as to what they're going to do. So they don't have to think about nothing. And all of a sudden you come in, like Oz to help them. And all of a sudden now they got to make decisions. Now they got to do this. Now they got to do that. So it's kind of like, whoa, never mind. I don't even want to do it now. And you have to just stop and be like, okay, it's okay. And then just go through their anxiety with them. You breathe, give them exercises, and then you talk it out through them. And they will be like, oh, that was so much easier. Yeah, you have to stop and take a pause as their CTC or their coordinator, whoever your designated title is. But yeah, I've been through that with many of my consumers. And so it's kind of like, because I'm in a rush, girl, let's get you out of here. Let's go. And they're like, but no, I'm used to it. I know where my meals are coming from. I know where my pills are. I know. And then, well, we can do this by yourself. You can also take your own pills. You can also cook your own food. You can also do this. So you really have to be mindful of that when you're talking to them and not overwhelm them, because they are very overwhelmed when it comes to that. And it's very rewarding when they can actually tell you, oh my God, I'm ready to do this on my own. I'm ready to do this for myself. And that's the most joy out of doing this job, in my opinion. And I've been doing it for a year. So I was like, this is awesome.
Okay, I'm going to cut you guys off. We have reached the bewitching hour of 4 o'clock. Thank you guys very much for your presentation. There was a few more questions. Make sure you reach out to Megan or Margarita or Richard. The presentation will be available on the April website underneath the link. Don't forget to fill out your evaluations, and thanks for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. So glad to be here.